Hello, friends. We're back again. It's Fightful Overbooked, and it's time for a new show. It's time for myself and my co-channel manager here at Overbooked,
Not
Jeremy
friend.
Lambert.
Not friend.
I didn't say friend.
I don't even know why I'm here.
Colleague?
Am I getting paid extra to do this with you?
Depends. If people really like this video and we get it out into the algorithm and it's popular, then yes.
Everyone always talks about these algorithms. We do this shit for the love of the game, Joel Pearl.
Yes, and also once you invoke the word algorithm, it just doesn't hit anywhere. It's fine. The show's called Newsworthy. Here's the thing. In wrestling news, we've noticed that there are a lot of people who maybe just read the headline and that's about it, and then they comment on it. And there's also a lot of really cool stuff, Jeremy, that kind of flies under the radar and maybe deserves a little bit of a rub. So we got together and we talked about how we could best serve our viewership, our readership, the people who care, the people who want to know more about wrestling news, and talk a little bit more in depth about what we consider to be newsworthy each week here on Fightful.
Really, It's just to put myself over and all the great work that I do on Fightful. But it is to spotlight 9:30s Eastern on youtube.com/Fightful. It is to spotlight different content creators and different interviewers and different, people who do stuff in the wrestling landscape, maybe even different wrestlers that they didn't have heard of, maybe stuff that you missed from the week. But as a lot of people know, I listen to a lot of wrestling podcasts. I cover a lot of wrestling news. As we're recording this, literally nothing is happening in the wrestling news world right now, Joel Pearl. Vince McMahon didn't just retire 2 minutes ago. That didn't happen at all. But a lot of stuff does happen in wrestling news that maybe you don't know because things like Vince McMahon retires does happen. So I wanted to try to spotlight these things and also showcase and be proud of my work a little bit, because as people know, I work very hard and people appreciate my work. And I want to appreciate my work because most of the time I hate everything that I do.
So before anyone thinks that this is just a Jeremy Lambert ego ride,
It
is, first of all, yes, no questions asked. I do feel it pertinent to bring up the fact that, and Jeremy will agree with me because he has to, I brought this idea to him a few months ago, and we've only now just kind of come around to it because originally you and I wanted to do this as a quarterly thing, and then we realized there's so much news every day, we can make it weekly.
Let's be fair. Let's be fair to this. You brought this idea to me as, hey, let's put yourself over as a headline pop. Like, what were your best headlines of the month? And I thought that was great. And we never got to do it because we're both very busy. You just had a child, apparently.
Supposedly.
Yes. So we're both very busy people. And then as I started brainstorming content ideas over the past couple of weeks, I thought, I really want to continue to play off of the spotlight stuff and put other content creators over, put over other interviewers over, because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but a lot of interviewers reach out to me. I see a lot of shit, mainly on Reddit. Bury the Redditors now. I see a lot of shit on Reddit of why does Fightful be link back to us for the transcription? They're taking other work. And there are interviewers out there who are why are you getting credit for the work that I did by doing the transcription and you're getting the link back and everything? There are a couple out there. There are a lot of dorks on Reddit and dorks on Twitter who also say the same things. What they don't know is that a lot of times when I transcribe these interviews and I run it on the site, the people who did the interview will DM me and will be like, thank you for covering this. It led to big numbers for me. I appreciate it. Fightful is a big platform. Thanks for giving us a boost and everything. it was really good. And I was like, and I'm always I got more coming from it. It's a great interview. If you ever do these interviews, let me know. Cause I try to seek and find everything that I can. And everybody covers the Renee Paquettes and the Chris Van Vliets of the world, but I try to listen to other stuff that's out there that maybe isn't being covered by a lot of big wrestling websites or wrestling websites at all, unless they're covering it because they are aggregating from us, because I've helped turn us into one of the biggest content sources out there in the wrestling landscape. So I wanted to further showcase them and put myself over. Again, I'm not gonna be ashamed to say that I do good work and that I do a lot of work. and I wanted to be like, hey, I had to listen to this. I thought this was interesting. Maybe you should go to listen to this. Maybe you should go and read this article. So we're not going to do like the top news stories of the week, of the top 5, what gets the most viewed and things like that. It's going to be like, I found this interesting. Maybe you missed this. Maybe you've never heard of this show or this interview before. Go listen to this. And honestly, this week, I will say, I don't think is the best representation of all of this, because a lot of this stuff was more of the high profile stuff, and I didn't get a chance to read or listen to some of the lesser profile stuff. But that is the genesis and the basis of this show on a week to week basis for people who don't understand or want to understand. And this will be the only time I go through this, and most of the time we will jump straight into the news, but I feel like I had to rant about that for a second.
Totally fair. It's the first episode. We can get away with anything at this point. Let's go back to July 18th. This is we'll start with the first article that I've pulled up here. And it's of Steve Fall of NBC Sports Boston interviewed Claudio Castagnoli. And the headline is going to pop up on the screen in a second through the magic of post-production. Claudio Castagnoli isn't sure anybody has an answer as to why he didn't level up in WWE. Talk to me about, first of all, maybe what the headline, what brought you to that headline, and also maybe expand a little bit as to why you thought this was a newsworthy article for the week from July 18th.
Claudio hasn't done like a bunch of interviews since leaving WWE. And in one of the interviews, he did say that like he's not going to badmouth WWE or anything like that. We'll see if his tone changes at the stage show with Van Vliet next week. But he hadn't gone into much depth with his WWE departure and everything. But I thought Steve Fall, who does great interviews, by the way, if you've not listened to his interviews, he did the interview with Marco Stunt a few weeks ago that got a lot of traction. I think he does a great job. And he basically just asked, like, you know, in AEW, you're presented like this big star. Everyone knew for the longest time, like, hey, push Claudio. We got the Cesaro section, push Cesaro and all that stuff. So he's like, what do you, there's the famous brass ring comments and everything like that, which Claudio's been asked about before. But Steve just basically asked, like, why do you think that you didn't essentially get that push in WWE? Why do you think like you weren't able to level up? Those were the words used in WWE, whereas AEW presented like a big star, ROH, you're about to challenge for the world title. What was it in WWE why do you think it went wrong? I like Claudio's answer, and he said he wasn't going to bury anybody. So I get that. But his answer was just like, I don't know. I don't think anybody knew. And if I did know, and if I was told, this is what I would have done. Like, I would have done these things. So he's never really spoken about that of like, yeah, we think Claudio, he's been talked about as the most underrated. He's won that award like 300 times in The Observer. He's been talking about this for years. So I thought it was an interesting question to ask. I thought it was a very good question to ask by Steve. And I thought Claudio gave a good answer to it of like, I don't know. I'm not sure anybody knows. And again, if someone knew, they didn't tell me. And if they told me, I would have done that. As far as the headline goes, I needed a character limit. I wanted to go with something of like, if I would have been told, I would have done it, but I thought that might have been like a little bit misleading. So I just kind of went with like, I don't think anybody has the answer as to why it didn't happen. So that's how I kind of landed on that headline. But it was a really good interview with Claudio.
Yeah, it's worth checking out. And again, you can check it out through that article on Fightful.com. And yeah, Claudio really does put over his time in WWE. He has a lot of positive things to say, but he's very honest about how he was approached and how he was used in WWE. So it's a good interview. Check it out. Let's move on. So this is from July 20th. The headline is Brian Pillman Jr. wants the opportunity to, quote, kick some ass after heels speak on his family. So this is coming from the Universal Wrestling podcast. Tell us a little bit about this Brian Pillman Jr. interview. And it was all about wrestlers bringing their personal lives onto television. That's where we got this article. Go ahead.
Yeah, because Christian Cage had mentioned it. MJF, when they were feuding, he had mentioned it. Brian Pillman Jr. had done a couple interviews. He did one with Count It Out as well, and he gave some good answers there. I thought this was another good question on Universal Wrestling podcast. And, you know, like, what do you make of this? Because anytime you hear like, oh, your father's dead, your father's had all these issues, your mom had all these issues, you always think like it's approved by the person or else they're not going to say it. And Pillman admitted as much, like, yeah, like, I get it. I get why it's said. And he even said, like, I used my name. I'm Brian Pillman Jr., so I get opportunities because of that, especially early on. So I get it. I thought the interesting thing was he basically admitted and said what a lot of people were thinking. He's like, they say all this shit about him, and then he gets his ass kicked. And he looks like a dork of like, he doesn't do a very good job defending his family's honor, and he recognizes that. And it sounds like he's planting the seeds for a heel turn a little bit. I mean, if you watch Dynamite, they just got their asses kicked again, and who knows what's going to come out of that. But I thought it was a good question, and I thought he gave a good answer of like, hey, like, I am listening to it. This is not going to be conveyed in text, but if you listen to it, you can really hear the frustration in his voice of like, I don't have a good answer as to why they say these things and then kick my ass, and then I don't get any comeuppance out of this. And he sounded very frustrating that continues to be the case. And he tried to make it seem like it's going to be an angle and eventually he's going to snap and heel turn and everything. I don't know if that's the case, but we'll let it play out, Joel Pearl. But I thought this was a good. Brian Pillman Jr. is very honest about things. And if you listen to these interviews, listen to the one with Counted Out as well, you can kind of hear some of those frustrations in him just like questioning what's going on in his position in AEW. And I'm not saying Brian Pillman Jr. is like the greatest wrestler in the world, but I understand some of the frustrations that he has right now with his overall booking.
So moving on, let's go into July 19th. This one was actually a really interesting story. And it actually got a fair amount of coverage compared to the last two that we've talked about. And it's Ric Flair reveals that he's dealing with plantar fasciitis, and he says that Charlotte will attend his last match. So this was an interview that Flair gave to Busted Open Radio, where he talked about dealing with the injury. He calls it minor. But I personally heard it get picked up by a few different outlets, and Fightful was the first place where I saw the aggregation, where I saw the transcriptions. So talk to me a little bit about the Ric Flair interview from Busted Open Radio.
So he was a surprise guest on the show, and they had hyped of like, oh, we got a surprise at 11:30. And then when I saw his Flair, this was the day after the match was announced. I was like, well, got to listen to this. And he said he was at the doctor getting the plantar fasciitis checked out. He sounded awful. He was coughing through everything. But I mean, he's definitely going through with the match. This is actual a big news item. Like you said, like it kind of got picked up everywhere. Busted Open's one of the biggest like wrestling shows out there. So it's not like this was undercovered or anything like that. I just thought it was an interesting story because beyond what he said of, hey, I have plantar fasciitis, I'm going to go through with it. I'll just shoot it up. And if it doesn't feel right day of, and we'll just go with it. I thought the way he sounded during this was, I can't convey this through text, but he sounded awful, just coughing, like misremembering stuff. He didn't sound great. And it made me very worried about this match next Sunday. And that was the biggest takeaway I had from it beyond his foot injury. He did sound at least he knew that he wasn't going to be the old Nature Boy in this, and that Andrade and Jay Lethal are going to do a lot of the work. He's like, yeah, I want to do a tag team match so I can be hidden. Like at least he knew his limitations in that regard, but he didn't sound good in this interview. And that concerned me more than anything.
So I found it very interesting too. You're right. He sounded a little off, and I don't think people really understood that if they didn't listen to the interview, right? It's one thing if you're getting it as a transcription and not as an actual, you can't hear it. So it's good. I'm glad that you're able to give a little bit more color, a little bit more commentary to this.
And I will say this: I've been putting interviewers over. Bully Ray, who I don't care about his opinions, great interviewer. Like when he does the interviews on Busted Open, I tune in more often than not, even if I'm not like, oh, this guest is whatever. Because Bully Ray will ask follow-up questions and he will press and ask these questions. And I really appreciate Bully Ray as an interview. I put him over on Twitter before, but he's a very, very good interview. And he was doing the interview with Rick during this, and he did a very good job.
I think it's worth actually putting that out there more, because I think we get a lot of the time we get stuck in how someone's opinion may reflect on their ability, when in reality, just because we don't agree with their opinions, sometimes their ability to say, give an interview or get an interview, it kind of plays a better role than their opinions. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Booker T has a lot of opinions as an interviewer. I can't say I listen to a ton of them, but I would not put him on the level of like a Bully Ray when it comes to interviews. But yes, Bully Ray is a very good interviewer.
Yeah. So let's move on. This one's going to be a little topical in care of the actual headline. This one is actually aggregated from the San Diego Comic-Con. So you got this one from there. The San Diego Comic-Con's ongoing right now as we speak. And was Vince McMahon was impressed with Tommaso Ciampa's broad shoulders. So this one, this one flew under my radar. Like I saw it. This is from July 22nd. So it's from today as we record it, Friday. I saw it. I didn't pay much attention to it. So I'm actually very interested as to what brought you to showcase this particular article.
The Comic-Con stuff, like AEW does a bunch of Comic-Cons. WWE is now doing a little bit more. They're interesting because not a lot of people like do really cover them. No one's like seeking out Comic-Con panels. And so when they come across my radar, I like to listen to them because you get weird answers and wacky answers like this. Undertaker had some answers with stuff. Cody had some answers where he's like, yeah, fine me $1,000 every time I say belt. I don't care. Like, it's just stuff that a lot of people aren't going to pick up, but it's fun to pop me. And Tommaso Ciampa tells this Vince story of, he's wearing the long pants for a while early in his main roster run. And then Vince saw him in like shorts. He's like, oh, you got slender legs. You got broad shoulders. I like this. Good shit. And so that's why he went back to the tights.
And it's worth mentioning that Ciampa does a Vince impression when talking about this whole interaction with him. So again, it's worth seeing it if you can.
It's always funny to me when I listen to all these interviews of like, no one will say Vince. They will say like, because Ciampa does the same thing. He will say like the higher up. They will say like, or the CEO, the man. They won't actually say Vince McMahon, but then they'll do the Vince impression so everyone knows they are talking about Vince. A lot of wrestlers do this in their interviews, and they won't refer to him as Vince. They'll just say like the person in charge, he who shall not be named. Like New Day would always do that, he who shall not be named, and then they do the Vince impression. They're like, oh, we're talking about Vince. That's what Ciampa did here. He said, someone very high up in the company, and he goes, shoulders, broad shoulders, kid, love them.
Legs are a little slender.
It's good. It was a good impression too. Ciampa did a good job, but I wanted to cover it because one, I thought it was just a funny story. I like Ciampa's impression, and the Comic-Cons generally go like uncovered unless they come from like me or like Andrew Thompson. We're the only people who seek that stuff out.
Yeah, it's a good one. I'm glad that we had this topic about this particular story because it definitely makes me want to go and suss out more stuff from San Diego and other Comic-Cons. And then the final one, this was your magnum opus of the week. This was the one that got all the attention. I'll tell you what I loved about it in a second, but everyone knows it. If you haven't seen it now, then you've been living under a rock for the week. Bryan Danielson is sex and a really good listener who has thought about faking his own death. This is one of the articles, Jeremy, where I had to read it immediately. I saw it and this is from July 20th, by the way. I read it. I read the transcription, and immediately I loved the end part where Brian says, I wouldn't tell you, my wife, Bree, because you would tell everybody.
Yeah.
But I'd tell the kids if I ever faked my own death. And I'm like, you trust your kids with these secrets, but not your wife. Is just a hilarious idea and concept to me. Tell me about it. I mean, the Bellas podcast is already very popular, but what did it? Well, like, Danielson has given you so much in this game. So go ahead. Here's
how the mind of Jeremy Lambert works for people who really care to know. This interview, this whole thing is actually 2 weeks old. This was from a Bella's podcast 2 weeks ago. And I wasn't around because 2 weeks ago, I was sick. I was very sick. I was not doing well. And so I was not on top of my game 2 weeks ago, but I saw that they just done a new podcast, and Danielson has obviously been in the news with his injury and everything. So I just went back through their archives, and I saw a couple weeks ago that they had Danielson on. And it didn't, based on the description, it didn't sound like he actually said anything wrestling related. So I didn't think I was going to get like Bryan Danielson gives update on injury, concussion, when he's going to return and stuff. I didn't think that at all because I think it probably would have been picked up by that point. But I was like, it's Danielson. I kind of got to listen to it based on all the good material he's given me since he's joined AEW. So I listened to it, and the faking death was one thing. There was another one that I can't remember. This was a story I was about to run. It was going to be like Brian, and I might still run it. Bryan Danielson doesn't like to be bothered with yes chants while he's taking a piss. Like that was a story they also told. And that was going to be my lead of what I was going to run. But then he kept talking and he kept saying more shit. And at the end of it, they're like, do a daily affirmation. And Bryan Danielson just goes, I am sex. And just like, Bree's like, huh? What do you mean? He's like, it's an affirmation. You could wake up, you say it. She's like, is that what you wake up saying? He's like, no, but you could. She's like, okay, I am sex. And I thought about just running the headline, Bryan Danielson, I am sex. But then I actually thought this was too clickbait. I thought it was too baity if people are going to like click this and be like, wait a second, he doesn't actually say anything about sex. It's like, it's just an affirmation type thing, whatever. Like, Fightful, haha. We already got stuff about that anyway. But like, okay, I thought that was too baity for me. So I didn't run that. And instead, I tied it into a bunch of different stuff that he said on the podcast, which was he thought about faking his own death. And the affirmation part, Bree is like, you are a good listener. And Bryan said, like, I want to be a better listener and everything. So that's how I just pulled that whole last block that they talked about there, that's quoted in there. I pulled that all together into the headline. And that's how I came up with Bryan Danielson is sex, also a good listener who's thought about faking his own death. And maybe I will run the Bryan Danielson doesn't want to be hit with yes chants while taking a piss.
I really enjoyed this article for the first thing I mentioned, but also just like the idea of faking your own death is just fascinating, especially for a guy like Bryan.
He was very, so yes, for people who have not listened to the podcast, and it's great. I actually really like the Bellas podcast. If I had more time to listen to like non-wrestling stuff, or if I just listened to podcasts and I wasn't work related, I'd probably listen to the Bellas podcast because I actually do find them very fascinating and fun. There's this question they're doing, like, would you rather, either or, and one of the question is, would you rather know how you die or know when you die? Like, that's the question. And Danielson's thing, I think he said, like, I would rather know when, because then I could go out and I could do all of this stuff in the time frame that I want to be able to do it and everything. And that's what leads to, I have thought about like faking my own death and everything. And they talk about like dying of like 1,000 paper cuts, but then it comes back to the other question was, would you rather go on a 6-month cruise with your like friends and family, or go on a 6-month hike by yourself? And then it's like, I'd rather just go on a 6-month hike by myself. I could be out, I could be alone, nothing to worry about. And then that comes back around to faking my own death. I'd be gone for 6 months, wouldn't check in, everything. It'd be great. I'd just get away from everything. So they play this like either or, would you rather type of game. And that's how the faking your own death. You could actually, like he says, he put a lot of thought into it. I totally believe it, because he's like, I put thought into this. Like, I don't know if I could get away with it. The age of social media and everything. Like, it seems very difficult to like fake your own death in 2022, but he's clearly thought about it. He just doesn't know how to do it. And yes, when he's like, I tell the kids, so like they aren't worried, but I wouldn't tell you. And then because you would spoil it. And Bree is like, oh, you'd have to like reveal yourself after I get like remarried and everything. Like if I ever got remarried, you couldn't take it. You couldn't see me with like another man. That's how you spoil it. It's like, yeah, this might backfire on me. It's a great discussion. Danielson's so great. And I love him and Bree. They're such a good couple.
So there we go. We got through a really good week.
Wait a second.
What?
I don't know if you're going to do this. So I'm going to bury these dorks on who want to come at Fightful and come at me and come at Sean Ross Sapp on this. Sure. I didn't know if you're going to ask this, Joel. It seems like you were ready to wrap this up.
I'm not ready for this. Too.
All right. Well, see, I got to bury some people. So when I write these headlines, clearly it's not actual wrestling news. It's just a wrestler saying this shit. But people are in the comments and they're like, why is this a headline? Do people proofread this stuff? Oh, Fightful is horny again. Sean Ross Sapp is horny again. He's rubbing thighs some more. What are we doing out here? One, people clearly don't read the byline. is the byline's right there. It says it's me. 2, we do this dumb shit all the time, especially me. Like, if a wrestler says some of this stuff, I like to run it because I think it's fun. As long as it's not, I don't like getting political or anything like that. As long as it's not like super outrageous or super offensive, I'm going to run stuff like this because it's funny to me and it pops me. And Sean Ross Sapp just kind of lets me do whatever I want. When you say like Fightful is horny because Veer is coming and all this stuff, we're having fun with this stuff. Wait. Oh, Veer makes his debut. That people wouldn't even run the Danielson headline. I'm sure that didn't get aggregated anywhere, but it did the most impressions we did all week. But people have fun with this stuff. It's stupid pro wrestling. Pro wrestling's the dumbest sport in the world. Let me run Bryan Danielson as sex headlines. I do really appreciate when people tag Sean and be like, oh, look at Sean, he's so horny and all this stuff. And Sean's like, people can't read the byline. I always appreciate, and this is where I will give gratitude and thanks to a lot of people, when they immediately tag me and they're like, oh, this is a Jeremy headline. I like that I have this brand that people know that like, oh yeah, Jeremy wrote this. This is something he would do. This is great. Everyone pops for it and everything. And I say it a million times. I love a good pop. Sami Zayn has actually said it. I love a good pop. I love to pop the boys. I like just popping myself. A lot of this stuff you do just to pop yourself and hope others have fun with it as well. And for the most part, 90% of people out there, maybe even higher, enjoy it. They have fun with it. They appreciate that I do these stupid headlines like this. And people say it's like clickbait. It's like, this is what's actually said out there. All right, everybody? Like, people appreciate it. For all the dorks out there who don't appreciate it, don't find it funny, keep it to yourself. All right, move on. Go enjoy your fake news stuff. Go enjoy your generic news that everybody else is going to run. All right, let us have some fun over here at Fightful.
Yeah. Listen, honestly, like, if you want the serious scoops and you want all that, just go subscribe to Fightful Select. If you like, come on, just go get it from there. Like, I'm not going to show.
Sean is out here reporting on Brian Pillman Jr.'s hair conditioner and stuff. Wait, that's serious over here.
I got Sean in my DMs about this. Wow, he's like reading my mind. Anyway, Jeremy, I think you're right. There's plenty of serious news, but all the fun stuff is afterwards. It's the stuff that we get to talk about here. So I'm going to get out of here. Let's get out of here. Jeremy Lambert, thank you. This is the first Newsworthy. Folks, we'll be back.